Spotfire has a crazy amount of geoanalytics capabilities, from using multiple interactive map layers to calculating driving distances and distances between points to doing things like spatial binning and other advanced geoanalytics features. You can do tons with Spotfire maps, however, we have to start with the basics. So for this video, I'm going to show you how to configure a map, and I'm going to start by first showing you the overview of the map experience. So let's jump in. To start, I'm just going to give you a sense of the interactivity with the maps. Here we're looking at housing prices in Victoria, Australia, and I'm just going to zoom in using the scroll wheel with my mouse. So you can see different points here. These each represent a different house, townhome, or apartment unit, and they're all colored accordingly with this bar chart here. Now I have these navigation controls. I can click the crosshairs for the panning mode, and I can pan around my map. I can also use the selection tool if I want to use a rectangular selection, a circular selection, or my favorite, which is the lasso selection. So with the lasso selection, I can select some points, and much like a scatter plot, I'm going to drill down into that data, get all my visuals, respond to it. Now, if I'd like to do both at the same time, I want to have that selection tool and I want to pan around, I can hold the control key down and right click with my mouse, and that allows me to move around the chart with the panning as well. Now this right here is the zoom to filtered items. This will allow Spotfire to jump to whatever data is in your map. It'll just jump to whatever is in that filtered items view, and that allows me to quickly find where I want to be on the globe. And with this, I can also zoom in and out using the plus and minus icons. Pretty self-explanatory. But what's also nice is there's a separate search feature here. This is a little bit different than the Spotfire search in that this search is actually looking for places on the globe and places on your map. So I can type, for instance, Deer Park Station. And this is going to find different stations and cities and whatever matches. So I can hit this and it'll jump to Deer Park Station on my map here. So that's the nice capability of the search. And you also have the layer controls. So let me come over here to layer controls, and here you'll be able to turn on and off different layers. So I have, for instance, these suburbs that are in these purple shaded regions, and I can turn those off. If I want to turn off maybe the traffic layer, I can turn off the traffic layer as well. And I just want a basic reference map, I can turn that on. So this is all in the layer controls, and we'll talk about configuring these layers in a little bit. Now, one thing to note is that you can only have one layer interactive at a time, and that is set with these radio buttons. So right now, the individual houses and units are set as the interactive item, but if I'd like to use my suburbs as my interactive, I can turn that on as well. And now my suburbs are these shapes that are interactive, and I can select those. Now let's talk about the different layers that are available in Spotfire. In Spotfire, you can have as many layers as you need, and they almost act as separate visualizations, and you can stack them all on top of each other as you'd like to and turn them on and off as needed. So there's different layer types, but first let me show you how you manage these layers. So back here, you have these layer controls. When you go into the visualization properties, you'll be able to see all of these different layers here, and the type of layers that they are as well is shown right next to it. Now you have a zoom visibility as well. So if you only want layers to show up when you're at a certain zoom level, you can set that on the zoom visibility. So here, when I zoom out, you can see that the houses and the suburbs disappear, but as I zoom in, they'll pop back up. And that way I can choose what is visible, what level of detail I want at different zoom levels. The layers themselves are all, again, in this management, and they all act almost like separate visualizations. You can go into settings and you'll see here all of the familiar options for setting a visualization: size, shape, colors. These are all within the different layer options that are within the whole map chart visualization. So now let's talk about the different layers. The marker layer is probably the most common layer to be used, and it's much like a scatter plot where you can put individual points where your data is, and you'll put those, position those typically where your latitude and longitude coordinates are. Now, something to keep in mind with your layers, not just marker layers, but all of your layers, is your projections and your coordinate reference systems. So there are actually different ways of projecting points onto the surface of the globe. It's not a perfect sphere, it's kind of elliptical. There's all kinds of different ways that geographically and mathematically points are plotted, and that's called a projection. And then there's also coordinate reference systems. So coordinates you might find are shifted off point. That's if you're not using the right coordinate reference system. So there are some common coordinate reference systems that are used, but if you're using some of the less common ones, Spotfire has that all built in, has a lot of different coordinate reference systems built in. So let's take a look at a marker layer example. So in my map chart visualization, in the properties, I'm going to go to add, and I can add all kinds of different layers here. I can also duplicate any layer that's selected so I don't have to reconfigure something. I can go here to marker layer to add those individual points, and I need to select the table that this marker layer is going to come from. I'm going to select Victoria Housings. So Spotfire's tried to figure out where to put this. Now these points, it's already recognized I had a latitude and longitude coordinate. And it's put that in positioning. So you scroll down to the bottom, you get coordinate columns, and you can put in latitude and longitude. It'll automatically recognize those names, but if you have a different name, you might have to manually select it right there. I can then go through and I can select colors for things like the type, and just like any other scatter plot. For size, I could do things like price, which is maybe makes a little more sense for this visualization. And I can configure this again, just like a scatter plot. Now, the difference is that you have in the data options, you have this coordinate reference system. So this is the coordinate reference system that your points are recorded in, and you need to make sure that matches. There are some other default options here, and you can hit other to bring in all kinds of other stored coordinate reference systems in Spotfire. Now that is a coordinate reference system for the layer. There's also a coordinate reference system for the map chart as well. And so this is what the whole background is showing. And when I right click on the map and I copy map coordinates, that's going to match to the coordinate reference system. Now in your layers and your marker layers, you can also set these to be things like pie charts. So if I turn this on, I have this for each individual suburb. I have this segmented by the number of houses and townhomes are in each individual suburb. And you can just do that in your pie chart by going to shape and selecting pies. Now let's talk about the other layers. The next most common type of layer is a feature layer, and this is for geometries. So you can bring in points, lines, or polygons. You can't put all three into one feature layer. It has to be either points or lines or polygons. Now, points we'll typically use a marker layer for, so you're really only going to use this for lines and polygons. Now, the geometry data can be in a shapefile that has the extension .shp, and you can just drag and drop that into Spotfire and it will read that. And if there's even a custom projection in there or custom coordinates, it'll read that as well and put it into your Spotfire map. Now, even if you don't have a shapefile, if you have some governed sources, like in a SQL server, you have different geometry data, Spotfire can read that as well. And that way, when the data source changes, all the analysis that are tied to that one data source will be updated with the new geometries. So let's look at the feature layers. So back here on my map, I'm going to go to add, and I'm going to choose a feature layer, and I'm going to choose the localities. And this is going to bring in all the localities for this whole region that I have in Australia. And I can go into my appearance. I can change things like my polygon border color. I can change the color of my values however I'd like to, so that this way I can format my geometries however I need to. I can even increase the transparency so I can see what's behind those points or those geometries and polygons as well. So that's a simple point for adding a feature layer, but it's also worth noting that you do have some automatic geocoding tables in here, and this is from the Spotfire library. So if I wanted to go ahead and add, for instance, in Australia, all of the states and territories, I could add that as well, and it's going to bring in this whole polygon boundaries right from my Spotfire library. TMS and WMS layers offer some good extensibility where you can pull in things like live traffic and live weather, bus routes, transportation routes, pull those all in from the web and render them in Spotfire. Now, they're not going to be interactive and you can't select the data, but it will render as a background layer that you can use for reference. So let's take a look. So to add a TMS and WMS layer, the TMS layers are under the map layer option, and then there's TMS, and WMS is the WMS layer. And I already have a couple of these added. So I have the live traffic here. I'll turn that on, and we can see right now the traffic in Melbourne. I can zoom in and I can see this right on the roads. Now the way I set that up is just going into settings, and you can just put in the URL of your tile map service right there, and you can adjust things like transparency if you need to as well. Now for the WMS layer, here I have public transit and I can turn that on. And now I'm getting all of these bus routes and train routes in Melbourne. And the WMS layers are nice because you actually have the option to use login credentials if you want to secure it, if you have some secure WMS layers. And you also get different sub layers for a lot of these. So for instance, if I wanted to add ferry routes, I could add ferry routes in and you'll see that pop in. So I can choose to make this as busy and detailed as I'd like. All that's customizable with the WMS layer, and you can also do things like adjust the transparency. Now next is the default layers in Spotfire. You have a default light theme and dark theme, and you can customize the different detail that you want to show with each of these. Spotfire maps are automatically going to create a default map layer for your background, and this is going to be shown as the map layer type. You can also customize this, so you can go to add map layer and you can go to the map layer option, and this is nice because you can choose to just show things like the roads or just the labels, and if you do that, then you can turn off all the other references in the background. So here I have just the road showing, and that allows me to control what level of detail I want. Now the other nice thing is you can go into tools and options, and in your application preferences you can go to map chart and you can add different TMS and WMS layers for like satellite imagery and stuff coming from different URLs, and every new map chart is going to show this, and that way you don't have to keep entering in that URL for new maps whenever you're adding new custom layers. Now lastly, there's image layers. They can be placed right on geographical maps and dragged around, or you can even use them as references in the background for non-geographical maps. An example here is this ternary plot, which is on a map chart, and as I select different basins, you'll see how the geology is marked on the ternary plot. So I've created a new chart type here using a map chart. Another example is this airplane map where I can select different passengers and I can see them interactively on my seating chart. So the different charts here are all interlinked with this map chart that's giving me a whole reference with the airplane. Now in Spotfire, adding an image layer is pretty simple. You go to add and then image layer, and then you can browse for something on your local drive. So I just have this yellow square and I'm just gonna drop that in. Now with Spotfire 10.7, you can actually drag and drop these around by right clicking and editing the image position and moving this around wherever you need to, and you can even distort this. So if I wanted to like highlight a certain region on my map, I could do that by just dragging this and reshaping this. And then I can also go here into my settings and I can make this a little bit transparent as well. And that gives me a highlighted region here for that map. And I can just right click on this and uncheck the edit image position, and I have that image now fixed on my map for reference. So this was already a pretty long video, and we just scratched the surface of what you can do with maps and Spotfire. You can do all kinds of things with Python and R and geoanalytics calculations, spatial joins, spatial transforms, and we even have a lot of extensions on the TIBCO community for different templates that you can plug right in. So make sure you check out those resources and ask your questions on the community to learn more.